Okay, let's dive into this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a stack of sources here, mostly centered around Isah Abubakar's book, In the Pursuit of Purpose.
Right.
And our mission, basically, is to cut through all the detail and grab the most important ideas.
The key insights.
Exactly. Think of this as like your shortcut to understanding what the author's saying about finding your path, making those big life choices,
Especially around career and education, yeah.
and just dealing with all the pressures that come along with that.
And what's really interesting about these sources is how the author mixes things up. You get personal stories, but also these like historical examples
Oh.
and some pretty direct commentary on, society and education systems, particularly in Nigeria.
So it's really looking at those external forces versus, well, that inner compass, I guess.
Yeah, that tension between the two.
So where does this whole journey of purpose usually start, according to the book? It seems like it kicks off really early, right? Shaped by parents.
Definitely. Parental influence is highlighted as like a massive factor in those first career thoughts or directions.
The book talks about two extremes, doesn't it?
It does, and neither sounds particularly easy to navigate. On one hand, there's what's called parental abandonment.
Which isn't always literal, right? It can be emotional.
Exactly, emotional neglect. And the core idea here is that this can leave this kind of void. It might lead to someone lacking a strong sense of self later on, always needing validation from others because that basic foundation wasn't there.
That sounds tough. And the flip side is
Parental enmeshment. So total opposite. Over-involved parents, basically.
where the kid becomes almost like an extension of the parents' plans.
Precisely. Their own needs, maybe their unfulfilled dreams, projected onto the child.
Okay. The book uses historical figures to illustrate this, doesn't it?
Yeah, some really great examples. Charles Darwin, for one. His dad was a doctor, successful, and absolutely expected Charles to follow him into medicine.
But Darwin hated it.
Couldn't stand it. He was drawn to botany, collecting beetles, that sort of thing. Felt huge pressure.
Yet somehow he makes this, like, totally counterintuitive decision to go on the Beagle voyage, unpaid.
A massive risk, based on a gut feeling, really. A pull that was just stronger than his father's expectations. He pushed back, chose his own path, and, well,
Changed science forever.
pretty much. And his father did eventually come around, which connects to another concept the author brings up,
Hi, Jay.
this idea of slaying the father figure.
Okay, sounds dramatic.
It does, but the author clarifies it's not about, actual fighting or conflict. It's more strategic.
How so?
It's about showing your maturity, your competence to those authority figures, parents, mentors, whoever, so they eventually kind of give their blessing, or at least let you go your own way.
So you prove you can handle it, build that trust.
Exactly, so they can let go a bit. It's persuasion through competence, really.
Gotcha. Less fighting, more proving. The sources mention Jean-Paul Sartre, too.
Right. Raised by his grandfather, who apparently really discouraged him from literature.
Oh, interesting.
And the author sort of speculates this might have actually, maybe inadvertently, pushed Sartre towards writing, maybe seeking validation at first, but then doing it for its own sake.
And Mozart. That seems like a classic case of parental pressure.
Oh, absolutely. His father was so invested, almost suffocatingly so, in his career within that rigid court system. Mozart felt trapped.
Creatively stifled.
Completely. So he made a radical break, went off to Vienna, which apparently really damaged the relationship with his dad.
But artistically.
It unleashed this incredible wave of creativity, right? Even though his life ended up being short. That freedom was key.
And Martin Luther King Jr. is the last example. Similar story with his father being a prominent pastor.
Yeah, clear expectations there too. But MLK Jr. was smart about it. He pursued his own interests, sociology, theology, philosophy, kind of quietly, while still appearing to follow the expected path.
Playing the long game.
Sort of. Until his own convictions, especially around social justice, became so strong, he just had to commit fully to his own calling. He drew that line.
So you see these common threads, don't you? Pushing back, navigating strategically, finding what really drives you, despite the pressure.
Definitely. And the author connects this very specifically to the Nigerian context, suggesting that quite a few African or Nigerian parents tend towards that over-involvement.
Try to protect their kids.
Often, yeah, trying to help them avoid the same mistakes or struggles they faced. But sometimes using what the author calls an expired blueprint.
Expired blueprint. I like that phrase. Pushing careers that maybe aren't as relevant now.
Exactly. It can be subtle pressure or really overt.
That sounds like a tough spot for everyone involved. Does the source mention any healthier scenarios?
It does mention something called functional bonding, where parents give support, nurture, but also set healthy boundaries. That leads to a kid with a more secure sense of self, able to follow their own path, but with that support network.
But the author says that's becoming rarer.
Yeah, notes that it seems less common these days.
So for many people, navigating those early choices under that weight of expectation is just part of the process.
It really makes you reflect, doesn't it? How have those external expectations, especially from family, maybe shaped your own thinking? How might you strategically navigate those pressures?
Definitely food for thought. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From family influence to something almost everyone questions at some point. The value of formal education, school.
Ah, yes, the big "why am I doing this?" question. The sources really tap into those common student frustrations.
Like, why am I stuck learning calculus when my friend dropped out and is making tons of money?
Yeah.
Or why do my teachers seem kind of stuck themselves?
Or the idea of just finding a godfather figure to get ahead quickly. How do you get street smarts in a classroom? These are real questions.
So how does the author answer that? Does school actually pay off?
The argument presented is yes, it does pay off, but, and this is the key insight, maybe not primarily for the specific stuff you learn in the curriculum.
Not for the facts and figures.
Not mainly, no. The book points out how quickly we forget specific details after exams, and it mentions psychologists talking about how hard it is to actually transfer abstract skills learned in one context, like a classroom puzzle,
Right.
to a totally different real-world situation, like
Yeah.
that military radiation problem analogy used in the source.
Okay, so if it's not necessarily the knowledge itself, why do employers value diplomas and degrees so much?
Because, the source argues, school acts as a powerful signal. Doing well in school signals certain traits that employers really value.
Like what?
3 main things. Intelligence, meaning you can learn quickly.
Yeah.
Conscientiousness, you got a good work ethic, you're diligent, you see things through. And conformity.
Conformity, meaning
Yeah.
you can follow rules.
Yeah, follow instructions, respect authority, basically fit into a structured environment without causing too much disruption. Academic success signals you likely have these qualities.
That actually reframes the whole point of school, doesn't it? It's less about what you know, more about proving your capacity to learn, work hard, and fit in.
Exactly. It's a demonstration of underlying potential.
And how does this contrast with street smartness?
Well, the source uses 50 Cent as a really compelling example here. Growing up in a place like Southside Queens, incredibly tough environment, he obviously gained immense practical knowledge. Resilience, adaptability, strategic thinking he had to learn that stuff.
But the book doesn't just glorify that, does it?
No, not at all. It's very clear about the huge risks involved: death, prison. It stresses that for someone like 50 Cent, it wasn't just about thrills or quick cash. He apparently treated hustling like a serious business.
Analyzing the situation.
Yeah, studying the market, the dealers, the cops, the users. He was learning, observing, making calculated decisions, and crucially, he eventually used those strategic lessons to pivot into something less dangerous.
Music. So he took the skills learned in that tough environment and applied them elsewhere. A different kind of intelligence, maybe.
Forged in a different fire, yeah.
Right.
But still involving learning, observation, and strategy.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the specific context the source explores. The Nigerian educational system. It sounds complicated.
It really does. The source paints a picture with some stark contrasts. On one side, you've got what it calls the admission crisis for ordinary people, the commoners.
Meaning it's hard to get into university.
Incredibly hard for many. The capacity at federal universities is just way lower than the number of people applying. The source quotes a figure like only maybe 15% can be comfortably admitted each year.
Wow. That must create massive pressure and competition.
Huge frustration. And according to the source, it pushes people towards what it calls indirect and illegal ways to get a spot.
Right.
Things like relying on influential contacts, godfatherism, basically using connections to jump the queue, outright bribery of officials, even things like the religious affiliation of admission officers playing a role.
And parents pushing for specific prestigious courses or universities, too.
Yeah, adding to the pressure, sometimes without considering if it's the right fit for the student.
The source mentions the JMB system, the entrance exams, and this catchment area policy. How does that work?
Right. JMB is the National Board for University Entrance. The catchment area policy was meant to help ensure students from all regions get representation, especially from areas considered educationally disadvantaged.
Okay, sounds fair in principle.
In principle. But the source points out a potential downside. It can mean that a student from an educationally advantaged state might need a much higher score, say 200 out of 400 in the example given, to get into a particular course,
Yeah.
than a student from a disadvantaged state applying for the same course who might get in with a significantly lower score because their regional quota isn't filled as quickly.
I see. So high scores don't always guarantee admission depending on where you're from.
That's the reported effect. And the source suggests this, combined with the fierce competition and other factors like bribery, can create a sense that just working hard academically isn't enough.
Leading people to rely more on connections.
Or illicit means, yeah. The source uses this phrase to describe the outcome. Everyone gets a trophy and no one is happy. It's important, though, to remember this is the author reporting on the perceived effects of the system.
Right, it's presenting that perspective, and this is contrasted with elitism.
Exactly. On the other end, you have elite Nigerians who often bypass that whole public system. They send their kids abroad or to very exclusive private schools within Nigeria, often with a kind of British influence.
And the goal there isn't just academics.
Not solely, no. According to the source, it's also about absorbing a certain kind of cultural capital, sometimes described as internalizing a sort of white Britishness, which is seen as valuable, way to distinguish themselves. It's about building social networks.
Acquiring a certain ease, a way of fitting into powerful circles.
Yeah, a feeling or disposition. Accumulating social capital, connections that pay off later in accessing positions of power.
So very different paths through education.
The author actually shares a personal note about attending one of these elite schools on a scholarship. Says it really opened his mind and opportunities. He mentions Henry Aniobi, who was an international math Olympiad participant from the same school, as another example of that kind of environment.
So opportunities exist, but the paths to them can look very different depending on your background.
Exactly.
It definitely makes you think. If you've been through or are going through any education system, especially a competitive one, how much do these dynamics resonate? Do you see similar things playing out?
Yeah, good question. So we've talked about these external systems, family, education, but the source material also strongly emphasizes the need to look inward.
The inner journey.
Right. Introspection, self-reflection, really digging into what gives you intrinsic value, what feels meaningful from the inside out, not just based on what others expect or reward. That's where true purpose comes from, according to this view.
And interestingly, the author suggests that seclusion, solitude, can be really important for that.
Yeah, it feels a bit countercultural today, doesn't it? But the source quotes people like Pascal and Einstein, be a loner, arguing that stepping away, being alone with your thoughts, is actually crucial for original thinking and self-discovery.
Fertile ground for ideas.
Exactly. And again, powerful examples. Malcolm X in prison that wasn't chosen isolation, but it forced him into intense self-examination.
He read constantly, right?
Voraciously. Philosophy, history, law. He used that time to completely transform himself, honing his thinking, becoming this incredibly powerful advocate. That seclusion helped him reconnect with something deep inside.
And Isaac Newton. The plague forced him into isolation, too.
And that's famously when he had some of his biggest breakthroughs, thinking about gravity, asking those fundamental questions, apparently sparked by seeing an apple fall. If the apple falls, does the moon also fall? That kind of deep questioning needs space.
Then there's Stephen Hawking, a different kind of seclusion imposed by his illness, ALS.
Right. That diagnosis forced a confrontation with his own mortality, and apparently with the fact that he hadn't been working as hard as he could have, despite his intellect.
It gave him a new sense of purpose.
Completely. That existential crisis resolved, and he found this incredible drive. He said something like, "Every day since has been a bonus." And look at his contributions, despite the immense physical challenges.
The source mentions existential crisis specifically, that questioning of meaning that can happen in solitude.
Yeah, referencing Viktor Frankl, who pointed out that meaning isn't some single grand thing, but something that can differ from moment to moment, person to person.
So the advice isn't to get overwhelmed searching for the meaning of life.
No, the author suggests it's better to break those huge questions down, tackle smaller, more manageable questions about purpose and value incrementally, rather than getting paralyzed by the big picture.
Which makes sense. And this kind of productive solitude is contrasted with, well, how we often avoid being alone with our thoughts now.
Exactly. The constant distractions, social media, binge watching, just keeping busy so you don't have to think too deeply.
The source mentions the COVID lockdown.
As a kind of mass experiment in free time, suggests that maybe many students didn't really capitalize on that unexpected seclusion for deep learning or reflection, maybe contributing to poorer academic results later, opting for distraction over introspection.
Hmm. Okay, so if purpose comes from within and introspection is key, what about passion? That's the advice we always hear, right? Follow your passion.
Right. But the source actually challenges that quite directly. It argues that often passion isn't the starting point, it's more like the result.
The result of what?
The positive feedback you get from doing work that is valuable to others, you get good at something, people appreciate it, and that feeling fuels the passion, not the other way around necessarily.
Interesting. Does it give examples?
Steve Jobs is the main one used here. The argument is he didn't start Apple because he had this lifelong burning passion for building computers.
Really? What was he into?
More like spirituality, philosophy, calligraphy, design. He took a job at Atari basically for cash. The source quotes him wanting to have fun and make money. He kind of stumbled into the early computer hobbyist scene.
So he saw an opportunity.
Exactly. He saw an opportunity and used the skills he did have, design sense, marketing, understanding what people might want, and partnered with someone technical like Wozniak. The success, this view argues, came from seizing a valuable opportunity and applying his talents, not from following a pre-existing passion for electronics.
That really turns the common advice on its head.
It does, and the author shares their own experience, too, which really highlights this more strategic way of thinking about career choices.
What was their story?
Well, initially they were drawn to theoretical physics, admiring Newton, Einstein, but there was parental pressure towards medicine. Then a friend suggested engineering, because they were good at math, had won an Olympiad.
Okay, so options opening up.
Right. And they even seriously considered becoming a professional chess player. They loved chess, felt intrinsically motivated, and were pretty good locally. But they did a really honest assessment, looked at their reality in Nigeria at the time, very few grandmasters to learn from, hardly any big tournaments, and crucially, not much perceived value. People weren't really willing to pay for chess coaching or spectating like they might in, say, Russia, which had a whole established system.
So the local skill didn't match the global potential or opportunity.
Exactly. And the environment, the infrastructure just wasn't there to support becoming world-class, realizing that was key.
So what did they choose in the end?
Petroleum and gas engineering, and again, not because of some deep-seated passion for oil rigs from day one.
It was strategic.
Highly strategic, based on analyzing Nigeria's main export, oil, seeing future potential, like the Dangote refinery project, looking at the lack of clear opportunities in other engineering fields they considered, and getting a scholarship to an elite university with good resources.
So analyzing the market, the opportunities, where they could realistically thrive.
Yeah, looking for that opportunity to blossom, as the source puts it.
It really emphasizes that need for a reality check on your skill level, beyond just your friends or local scene. Like the football analogy used, being a star in your neighborhood doesn't mean you're ready for the Premier League.
Right. And also, assessing if the environment you're considering actually supports growth. Are there mentors? Is there competition? Are there resources?
So it's not just about passion. It's about balancing that inner interest with a hard look at what the world actually values, what people will pay for, what opportunities exist.
And your realistic chance of excelling and contributing in that specific area.
Success, then, comes from that dedication to learning, observing, and acting strategically, identifying and grabbing opportunities.
That seems to be the core message. It's about informed choices, not just wishful thinking.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We started with those external forces, family, education systems, all shaping our early paths.
Right. Then we moved inward, looking at the importance of introspection, solitude, finding that internal drive for meaning.
And finally landed on this idea of making strategic choices, moving beyond just passion to really evaluate value, opportunity, and where you can realistically make an impact.
Yeah, the source material definitely offers a lot of tools, or at least a framework, for thinking through those really big, often difficult life and career decisions.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, to take away from all this is, given all these forces, family expectations, societal structures, that internal search for meaning, and the practical need to find valuable opportunities, how will you go about strategically charting a course that feels truly your own?